Half a day, and welcome to Coffee with the Candidates. This series was created to educate and inform Guam's voting population on the positions candidates running for office take on some of the island's most controversial topics. This episode will feature Republican senatorial hopeful Jeff Wheaton and Democratic senatorial hopeful Clynt Ridgell. Stay right there as Coffee with the Candidates continues after this break.
Hafa and welcome to another edition of Coffee with the Candidates. My name is Filian Guerrero from News Talk K57, and I'm joined by Republican candidate for Senator Jeff Wheaton. Hafa day.
Hafa day to you. Nice to be here.
So, Jeff, do you mind if we just break the ice? I know that, especially for a first-time candidate, interviews can sort of be a daunting thing. I just want to tell you a really quick, short story. Your sign is up on the corner store that I literally see every day. I pass by, and one time my friend was dropping me home, and he saw Jeff Wheaton PE. And the first thing he asked was, I didn't know that a gym teacher was running for senator. Can you talk to us a little bit about your background that earned those initials PE behind your name?
Well, professional engineer is regulated at the state level. There's usually statute, and it varies from state to state. But generally, to get the professional engineer license, you get a 4-year degree, 5 years practical experience, 2 tests, one on the fundamentals and then one on principles and practices. And you have people sign off that your experience is relevant and meaningful to practice the art, so to speak. And then you, and of course, pay a fee, and then you become a PE.
Okay, professional engineer.
That's correct.
Officially.
Officially.
Okay.
You get a rubber stamp, you can approve plans and designs. You can, in most instances, you can hang out a shingle, much as any other professional, a CPA,
sure,
or a lawyer.
Getting back to the election, we know that it's an interesting time. A whole number of seats are going to be open in the legislature. Why did you decide that 2018 was the time for you to run?
Well, I was a 33-year USDA employee, and I retired in January. And the Hatch Act prohibits participation in partisan elections by federal employees, but I retired in January. And I followed politics here on Guam ever since I've been here 22 years ago. And I see the opportunity for me to contribute. I've got children that are away from the island right now. I expect they'll come back. I don't have a large extended family, but I have a few relatives here. And I'd like to keep the parts of Guam that I find so pleasant and appealing, maintain those, defend them even, and also to contribute to improve it a little bit. So I saw this as an opportunity. I'm 63. We don't have a heck of a lot of time to accomplish a lot. It's not a career thing. So it just fell in place.
You're running as a Republican, and I would like to see how your political ideology sort of meshes with how our local government and our elected leaders chose to handle the erosion of our local revenue due to the mirroring of the Trump tax cuts. If you were in the legislature and you saw a fiscal problem coming down the road, or you were presented with the immediate cash shortages that came from the arguable result of our lack of planning for this, how would you have dealt with it? Maybe what do you think you would do that our leaders have done? And maybe more importantly to me, and maybe the voters out there, what would you do differently than what our leaders did?
Well, I followed it, as I have all the politics for all these years. And I think what's lacking is prioritization with governmental duties and obligations. Government can't be all things to all people, and it can't universally deliver on the wishes of the various interest groups and individuals on the island of Guam. So it gets prioritized, and I didn't see that happening during this pseudo-crisis. I think crisis is a little bit hyperbolic. People manage. Crisis is a typhoon. If we had priorities, then you would furlough the lowest priority. You would not send policemen home. And other critical needs and responsibilities of government would remain untouched. So I didn't see that happening, and I see that as kind of something that's missing from the action plan of government. And with everybody wanting something, and there are finite resources, there's not enough to satisfy everybody, it's a certainty that somebody will come away disappointed. They wanted something, they were even promised something, but for many, it just won't be there. So that's what I saw. It's lack of prioritization, and then just like the family budget, when the car needs a new transmission, we're not going to go out to dinner for the next 3 months, and we're going to have rice with just a little bit of something on the side. You know, that's the way I see it, Phil.
What about the increase of taxes? Because if you really look at how our government chose to handle and offset the loss of revenue, the erosion of cash, it was through a combination of cuts and increased taxation. Is that a line in the sand issue for you, or do you think there is a way to responsibly increase taxes to address the tax cuts that we have mirrored?
Well, the tax cuts were intended to leave more earned money in the hands of people rather than take it out for redistribution for whatever well-intended things that go on. So I would generally endorse abiding by those tax cuts as long as we're mirroring the federal tax code. Now, as far as recovering the lost revenue, a temporary GRT increase is administratively easier to accomplish. Mm-hmm. What I saw with the 2% sales tax was that we have a whole new tax structure, and we're going to have new forms, new reporting. This is a bureaucratic burden on anybody that's selling anything, with the exception of the free market folks down at the flea market. So I didn't see the 2% sales tax as really 2%. There's going to be a burden. There is going to be a burden on businesses to comply with it, should it remain in place. And it changes hour by hour, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. But I see a burden on businesses to comply with it, and even a burden on Rev and Tax to come up with the forms and the protocol and the reporting and assigning those collection and monitoring tasks to various staff.
There's a lot of concerns among voters right now, increases in crime, increases in the discovery of drugs. Obviously, how are the government finances translating into the delivery of services, the quality of education? Because there is so much out there, because there's obviously going to be so much on your plate, what would you see as your legislative priority if elected to office?
Well, I was asked that when I first announced by my sister-in-law on the phone. And a lot of people, and I've even been advised, take an issue, steer all conversations and questions, even from Phil, to that issue, and then become an expert on that issue, whether it be education, and it seems like everybody's for education, or crime prevention, or whatever. And I responded to my sister-in-law that I think the general primary functions of government are ensuring our personal freedom, making sure that we're physically safe from, in the public areas and in our homes, and that our property rights are maintained. And the other issues that come up, and who knows what issues will come up, in a legislative term, whatever issues come up, they'll generally fit under those. Education is important, but I'll be honest with you, my 3 kids went through public schools here, actually 4, public schools here, and they've done well. And I was in PTO for 6 years. We've got some good teachers here, and they teach, and all it takes is a blackboard and an attentive student and a parent that says, do your homework, and they do a fine job.
We're almost out of time here, Jeff, so I would love to give you the opportunity to maybe have some last words directly to the voters.
Sure. I've been on Guam 22 years. I think this is a great opportunity for me. I am appreciative of the openness of the people on this island, and I'm going to stay here, win or lose. Your support would be most appreciated. I will not be legislating for a re-election. I don't need the job. This is not a career. I want to contribute, and your votes and your contributions and ideas would be most appreciated, and I thank you for your time.
Now, maybe I could leave us with just one question, and that is, can you name one thing that you agree with in the current legislature, what our senators have done legislatively, and maybe just name one disagreement with a decision that our senators have made this term?
Well, I think the disagreement would be, there are a number. The disagreement would be, the primary one would be the banning of the gambling that kind of supported the Liberation Day activities. As far as agreement, boy, I'm unprepared to give an answer to that, but there are certainly some things they've done that I'm in support of.
Not to say that you disagreed with 100% of the decisions.
That's correct.
Okay,
yeah.
Understood. Philly Yongaro here with Jeff Wheaton. We will be right back after these. Welcome back to Coffee with the Candidates. Philly Yongaro here, and I'm now joined by Democratic candidate for Senator Clynt Ridgell. Hafaday, Clynt.
Hafaday, thank you for having me on Coffee with the Candidates.
So Clynt, would you mind if we break the ice?
Sure.
So, former coworkers, how surreal is it to be on this side of things?
Right, it's really different, but I'm excited and looking forward to the campaign.
Okay, the real icebreaker question as provided by our good producers. When you're in line at the fiesta table, what's the first kind of Kelaguen that you'll grab?
Well, I have to say it's actually 3. Kelaguen Benadu, Kelaguen Uhang, and Kelaguen Manuk, of course, which is chicken Kelaguen, deer Kelaguen, and shrimp Kelaguen. You gotta have the trifecta of Kelaguen.
Can't
to
just
me,
have
that's
one?
the trifecta. I guess if I had to pick one, it would the good old chicken Kelaguen. Yeah.
Okay. You've had a very long career in media covering our government. Obviously, one of the beats that you had at PNC was our legislature in Adelup.
Absolutely.
Why are you choosing now to run for office?
It's a good question. A lot of it does have to do with the fact that I worked in the media for so long, and I saw a lot of the things happening in the government and happening in the island. And sort of being behind the scenes as a journalist and a news anchor, and you know this well, we can't voice our opinions. We're just supposed to report the facts and report whatever we have, information we have without being biased. And it got harder and harder to remain sort of behind the scenes and not able to voice what I really felt. When I started to feel pain of the people, I really think the people of Guam are hurting, struggling, suffering, everyday people like myself, we struggle to make ends meet. You know, we sit at the dinner table talking with our other halves and with our family members about how we're going to pay bills and how we're going to make ends meet. And so I really felt that there's this pain of people on Guam that are struggling with the day-to-day things. And a big part of that, I felt, has to do with the government and the way the government has been operated. I think the government is broken, the system's broken, and I want to do my part and at least do the best I can to help fix it.
Since you are in a position to be opinionated now, can you give us an example of maybe a decision that was made in the legislature that you disagreed with?
Sure. Right off the bat, the most recent one would be the tax raises. Although I'm running as a Democrat, I consider myself a fiscal conservative, which means I don't like to tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend, which is what I think the government's been doing. The government's been raising its budget every single year. I covered the budget process, and every year just about the budget increases. They haven't stopped it from increasing, and every year the budget has gone up, and instead of finding ways to cut, they just figure out how do we raise more money. And the way they came up with this time around was to raise the taxes.
What about a decision that the legislature made that you agree with?
That's a little more difficult. Let's see, a decision that I agree with recently. Okay, well, passing the voter, technically it was a voter initiative, but it got put on the ballot first via the legislature, which is the medical marijuana initiative.
Okay.
So the legislature put that on the ballot, and I agreed with that.
Now, obviously, as someone who has come from the media realm, someone who is a former journalist, I'm sure you can tell the difference between a government that really values transparency and a government where you sort of have to fight to get information that the public deserves to know. What's your stance on what the level of transparency and accountability is in the government right now, and what would you like to see as the level?
Right now, I don't think it's very transparent at all. I don't think there's any accountability practically. There doesn't seem to be any accountability. As you mentioned, you know, as a journalist for many years, we have to do FOIA requests. And for people at home that don't know what that is, it's a Freedom of Information Act request. It's a federal law. There's also a local law, the Sunshine Act, that mirrors the federal law. So we have two laws, and it still is difficult to get documents, to get paperwork, to get things. And when we get things from the government, they often try to redact as many things as they can. They try to find excuses to say, oh, we can't give you this information because we found a technical loophole somewhere in the law that says we don't have to give you this information. They make it as difficult as possible sometimes to get the information that we're seeking. When this is public information, it belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the government.
What legislatively do you think you could bring to the table to try to fix that and maybe make the government more transparent, make the government more accountable?
Well, first of all, it's leading by example. I'll be extremely transparent, extremely accountable for anything and everything. So leading by example is the first step. And I think if someone leads by example, the others will be forced to follow because it'll set the bar higher, where the people will begin to demand that level of transparency and that level of accountability because someone's doing it.
Let's talk about something that I associate with you, and that is decolonization, the quest for self-determination. How important is it going to be, if you're elected to the legislature, to make that a part of what you want our lawmakers to address?
Well, absolutely. It's very important to me. I think self-determination is extremely important. It's a human right. Self-determination is a human right that should be afforded to all humans and all people, and I believe it should be afforded to the native inhabitants of Guam, and the native inhabitants were defined as those who were made U.S. citizens via the Organic Act in 1950. And I think this is a right that has not been afforded the native inhabitants of Guam and not been afforded them before, and it needs to be given to them. They need to have their right to decide what their political status should be. And I'm not even a native inhabitant.
That might be surprising for some people to know, because I think that there's a natural association with you and let's call it the Chamorro activist movement. And so how do you sort of square for maybe the people out there that feel like they've invested in Guam, this is their home,
Sure.
this is where they raise their kids.
Sure.
Obviously, you fall into all of those categories, and yet, you are putting this supportive narrative of this is a right of native inhabitants here.
As defined by the 1950, as defined by the law that they were made U.S. citizens via the 1950 Organic Act. Yes. So that definition, yes, absolutely. Okay, so how do I reconcile that? Well, first of all, I think people are afraid that they think self-determination automatically means independence. It doesn't. It just means they vote and decide what route to take. B, even if independence were selected, it doesn't mean let's kick out all the non-native inhabitants. Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that at all. It means now let's bring the non-native inhabitants together, bring everyone together to the table, and now let's craft a new government, a new political status for the island. The choice is just to allow the native inhabitants to choose what their political status should be, because they were never granted that. I sort of have an analogy to it. It's like if you owned a house, say you owned a house, and one day a bully came along and beat you up and took over your house. So let's say that was, say, the nation of Japan, for example, in World War II, came in. They're the big bad bully who came in and occupied Guam and took over Guam, all right? So now another guy comes in and says, well, hey, that's not right, kicks Japan out, kicks that bully out of your house, and says, okay, I got rid of the other bully, but you know what, now, since I got rid of that bully, hey, I'm gonna sit here in your house for a while. Let me put my feet up here on the table, let me just relax. So now a new guest is in your house and says, hey, since you were occupied that whole time, let me help you get back on your feet, buddy. Let me just help you get back on your feet. And when you're back on your feet, then you can take back control of your own house. All right, well, that guy who kicked out the bully who was more mean, the guy is nicer, the new guy is nicer, but he's still kind of running your house and he's making the decisions in your house, and what he says stands. And you're kind of like, well, okay. Then that guy says, hey, you know what, by the way, let me invite some friends over. I'm going to have some friends stay in your house. That's immigration. So the U.S. controls immigration and brings more people into your house. And then when all's said and done, now the thing is, okay, well, now you can decide what you want to do with your house. It's your house. We're going to give it back to you. You can decide. But hey, you need to let all the guests I invited into your house, they get to vote too to decide. Does that sound fair to you?
Well, I personally,
you don't have to answer the question. It doesn't sound fair to me. And that's the analogy I use.
So since you are a non-native inhabitant, I sort of want to touch on maybe, without trying to talk it up too much, the historic implications that it would be for someone of Chuukese descent to be elected to the Guam legislature. Can you speak to, if we're talking about we have a representational government, a representative democracy, how important representation of members of your community, how important it is to have that representation at the legislature?
I think it's very important. I mean, that's the essence of democracy. You just said it, representative government to represent the different factions of people that are out there. And the people of the FAS and FSM descent have not had a voice in the local government, but they are a part. We are a part of the community, and really, for me, it's not about being sort of the first Chuukese candidate of Chuukese descent or the first senator of Chuukese descent on Guam. That to me is just it's just an added bonus. It's not really something that I think is something that should be looked at as some historical significance or something. What's important to me is just bringing everyone together. I want to be a bridge between the Chuukese community, the FSM community, the FAS community, and the Chamorro community, or the rest of the community on Guam. And I want to bridge all of the communities of Guam together because we need to all work together. Together we're stronger. I know it sounds cliche, but it's true. United, we're stronger. And if we have a united community that comes together and works together, I believe we can solve the problems on the island if we work together. As long as we're divided, there's less possibility of solving these problems.
Clynt, thank you very much for joining us. Best of luck on the campaign trail. And I want to thank Mr. Wheaton and Clynt for joining us today, and want to invite you to come back next week and see all the other candidates that we have in store. Phil Guerrero signing off, and we will see you again.